Whether it's wildfires or even wars and global conflict, 2023 was filled with difficult news here and abroad. 2024 as well, we see those issues ongoing. While it's important to stay informed, the news certainly is laden with descriptions and imagery that can take a toll. We want to talk about what it means to bear witness and the impact it has on our collective mental health. And we're asking you, are you thinking of a new way of approaching things this year? You can tell us how you follow the news while protecting your own mental well-being. West Kelowna Fire Rescue Chief Jason Brolund will be a familiar name to many of you this after the 2023 wildfire season. As you may recall, his community faced the largest wildfire in its history, with more than 10,000 residents evacuated in phases over 3 days. Now, last fall, Brolund went to New York to speak at a UN climate conference to share his community's experience. And Dr. Jillian Roberts is a registered psychologist, a professor of educational psychology at the University of Victoria. She's a founder of mindkeyhealth.com, and she's put together an online course for families on coping with terror and tragedy. Good afternoon to you both. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation.
Good afternoon, Michelle.
Jason, I'll start with you. 4 months now since the evacuations in West Kelowna and Kelowna. How are you doing?
Well, I think all in all, we're doing well. I think it continues to be difficult, particularly for those who lost their homes. With the Christmas season, obviously couldn't have been easy. And our hearts go out to those people who are still struggling. But that said, I think our community is beginning to recover. More now, we're talking about how to build back. We're talking about lessons learned, and we're talking about how do we move forward. But it wasn't easy. Our firefighters have been through a lot. Our department has been through a lot. Those who came to help us from around the province and literally around the globe went through a lot when they were here. But also, it was the world turned upside down, and I know it wasn't easy for the public either. We asked a lot of them.
And asked a lot of you, what was the impact? How are you impacted?
Well, I think aside from, our world hasn't been the same since August when the fire started. Our focus has changed completely. Going into the new year, obviously there'll be a huge importance on prevention and how do we ensure that good comes of this. But I think for our firefighters, it was difficult on them. They came to work without me even asking. They wanted to be there. They needed to be there to help the community, but it left their families having to take care of things at home. In many cases, having to evacuate out of the way of the fire, and all of that was another added level of mental stress.
Jillian, Jason just talked there about asking a lot of the public. What impact can watching this, even from afar, have on people? Let alone if you're actually in that weather event, in that event, and affected by the crisis.
It's an excellent question. We know that people can be traumatized vicariously. So by watching someone else suffer, we can suffer ourselves. And I really want to express gratitude to our first responders and our firemen and firewomen in our province. They've done a wonderful thing for us and have kept us safe. So I want to say thank you.
West Kelowna Fire Rescue Chief Jason Brolund, and also joined by registered psychologist Dr. Jillian Roberts, and also a professor of educational psychology at UVic and the founder of mindkeyhealth.com. Now, she has put together an online course for families coping with terror and tragedy. I'll start with that as I go back to you, Dr. Roberts. What led to this course?
Well, I think I started to become interested in terror and tragedy after 9/11. I've been practicing for a very long time, and there was a sharp increase in families wanting help after like raw footage of 9/11. And in many classrooms, the TV was just turned on, and there was raw footage of very traumatic scenes. That was a turning point for me in my career.
And what do you recommend? I know this is aimed at families having those conversations with their children. What are some tips that you can share?
Well, I'm fortunate that my field has done a great deal of research around this, and we know what we should do in the wake of tragedy. And I will say that there are three main important things, whether you're talking to a child or you're talking to someone, like if a first responder was talking to someone fleeing. And those three things are, number one, validate their emotional experience, connect with them, like identify that it is scary, identify that there's changes in the air and that it's difficult to deal with, and that you would feel similarly afraid if you were in their position, right? So number one, validate their emotional experience. Number two, make sure people are not isolated. Bring people together. If there's children that have seen something on the television, bring the family together, bring a school together, bring a community together. That's why things like vigils are so important. And the third is create some way for people to have agency, like some way for people to feel like they're contributing or they have choice, so it can be, would you like to be on this cot or this cot in the emergency center? Just even small things, that sense of having some kind of control tends to allow people to bounce back much better from a traumatic event.
Okay, I just want to reiterate those 3 points. Validate the feelings, come together and make sure people aren't isolated, and give people a sense of agency. And I'll go back to Fire Chief Jason Brolund on that. We have done interviews with residents in West Kelowna who came together, collected blankets and household items, personal care items for people who had to flee. What do you make of what you did see in your community and how that helped people to cope with the trauma they were experiencing?
Well, I think Dr. Roberts hit it bang on there. And I think a lot of that is reflected in what we went through in West Kelowna. Obviously, there was a lot of dark days and some very difficult thoughts still me as I think back to it. But I also smile and there's some really warm feelings when I think of how the community came together. The public who would come to the fire hall at shift change and yell and scream and make signs for the firefighters. Like that was fuel for the firefighters as they went out on the line. But it was also, I think, it was a very good thing for the public. It gave people something to do, a place to be, somewhere to put their energy towards, and it was one of the heartwarming pieces of the fire. The things that the public brought us. I had to turn away food because it got to the point where it was just too much, what people were doing for us and what they were bringing. And I think these types of things, they allow people to feel like they are a part of what's going on around them. They allow people to contribute to the emergency in some small way. And the added benefit is they really help the firefighters and boost morale.
Yeah, I can imagine. We've been looking at some images on our screens here, and some of them are drawings that children sent in, colorful drawings posted, and messages on sheets of paper saying thank you. I can see a drawing of a firefighter there with a hose, a child having written, "You are my heroes." And it looks like they're housed. Firefighters are superheroes. I mean, I'm sure that is so heartwarming to be able to see. And we're looking at images of firefighters themselves reading these messages. Jason, is there something that still stays with you? You said you still have difficult thoughts, but when you look back at things that warmed your heart, is there a message, something that a resident brought that you keep close to your heart?
Yeah, I mean the food was great and it was much appreciated. But there's a sign that hangs in the fire hall even to today, and we walk by it every day, and it's a message from someone who lost their home in the fire. And myself, my firefighters, and those who came from around the province, we gave it our all. We did our best. There was nothing left out there, but the loss is still difficult. But being able to walk by that sign that essentially says, you did your best, even though we lost our home, that means a lot. And I think that sign will have a special place in our fire hall for many years to come.
Oh, that's really poignant. Jillian, we just heard Jason talk about looking back at some obviously memories are difficult, but the thoughts of how the community came together and supported the firefighters and their work really helps. When someone experiences that kind of trauma, firefighters, frontline workers, anybody who's actually in the middle of the difficult news that so many others can watch from afar, how do you deal with the looking back and thoughts coming back to you months down the road?
Well, we need to be very careful about taking care of the mental health of our first responders. My stepfather is a former fire chief, and I have seen firsthand what it can be like when you're a first responder and then you have to go home. One of the most important things to consider is the frequency and duration of distressing feelings. If you're experiencing significant distressing feelings or flashbacks, nightmares, things like that, more than a month after an event, we know that we're getting into sort of PTSD territory.
Okay.
So for us, it's the frequency, severity, and duration of the symptoms. And it would be at that point that we would want to make real sure that our first responders had access to high quality mental health care.
That's really important to keep in mind, when that it's time to seek professional help. Let's first, we have an email here before I go to our callers as we ask you, how do you plan to approach staying informed and consuming news while also protecting your own mental well-being? We're taking your calls, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. And email us to bctoday@cbc.ca. Lisa writes, first, I want to say thanks to everyone who works with people experiencing trauma related to accidents, fires, etc. And my heart goes out to everyone who experiences it. I don't watch the news. The visuals stay with me, and I feel what other people feel. For example, I've still never seen the World Trade Towers fall. I stay in touch with what's happening locally to the world, new and at all levels in between, thanks to CBC and PR. Okay, so it's the visuals, and we've talked about that, the images that certainly can be indelible. Thank you very much for your email. And Tasha is our first caller now, joining us from Richmond. Hi, Tasha, welcome.
Thank you for taking my call. I'm very affected by the events of October 7th in Israel, the Hamas slaughter of so many innocent people. I'm Jewish. I'm a proud Jewish Canadian. And since that time, I've had to pinch myself because the experience of anti-Semitism around the world and right here in Vancouver and Canada, Toronto, my home city, is something that I just can't believe that I'm living through what my ancestors lived through. And it's very graphic, and it's very out there, and it's on social media, and it's in our faces. And I find that my consumption of news has really, really narrowed down because it's too difficult. It's too overwhelming, and I was quite a news junkie before that. I want to know what's going on, but I don't want to know what's going on. And I want to hear from allies, and I'm not hearing from allies. So it's a very, very difficult time, and it is very traumatic. And plus what's going on in the United States and the fear of another fascist leader like Trump. And of course the slaughter of innocent Palestinian people. I mean, the world just can't seem to figure out that we do better when we don't hate each other. So I'm really very demoralized, and I can barely listen to the news or anything at this point. As I say, I want to know and I don't want to know. And I want to believe in people, and yet I feel let down by people in the kind of global total sense, and I feel very let down by our political leadership. So that's my story, and I know I'm not the only person that feels that way.
Mm-hmm. And the weight is heavy. I mean, I hear it in your voice, Tasha. It's certainly heavy. And so, do you think that will be your approach, a continued approach, then cutting back on news consumption?
Yes, I've cut back in a huge way, and I feel better for it. You can only read so much, and you can only hear so much hatred and blood libel and everything that's going on. I mean, these are things we were taught about as children, and I'm in my mid-60s. I mean, my parents went through this growing up. My grandparents went through this. My family was, in the Holocaust. There's people denying the Holocaust. That's not new, but I mean, really, you have to pinch yourself and say, really, is this really what's happening? Gosh, I thought we were more evolved, but here it is, the same old story. So I have to be really careful and just, take it one day at a time, and I do, and just pray for something better for. Not only in this situation, but for the whole world. I had a friend that years ago said, man is so mediocre. And man is in a lot of ways. Yet we had those stories during the pandemic of people coming together and helping each other. We saw the best. And now we're seeing the worst. So I'm not going to be on this planet that much longer, but I really feel for the generations that are coming up, because there's so much hatred, and it's terrible, and it's spewed all over social media, and you can't get away from it. And but I choose to limit it. So limit my intake of it. So a very good topic today.
It's very good to hear from you, Tasha, and you've touched on really how much further this goes than just self-care, right? You talked about a loss of faith in people. I really want to go back to Dr. Jillian Roberts on that. We've been talking about, looking at the best in people. She talked about the pandemic, the way the community in West Kelowna came together. But what happens when it makes the news is so upsetting, and your experiences and what you see, she talked about social media, just makes you lose faith in humanity and the people around you and leaders, as she talked about.
Yes, I think one of the things that Tasha said that really rung true for me was not seeing the allies. Shortly after the October 7th event, one of our team who has family in Israel, I was asking him, what can we do, and he said something that was very profound and had a ripple effect for me. He said, reach out to people that you know who are Jewish and just express support to them. And what that did for me is I sat down and I started to think about people I had met at conferences, former students, former colleagues, people that I hadn't been in contact with for a very long time. And I wrote them, and I just wrote them to let them know that I was thinking about them and praying for the safety of the people in the region. And it started a lovely, correspondence with people that I hadn't spoken to in a while. I think that comes to that idea of coming together, that sort of second really important value in trauma response is making sure that people are not isolated.
It's certainly an issue we've talked about. We had the Human Rights Commissioner for BC here on the program talking about concerns around a rise in anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, and what her calls were to deal with that. Jason, when you hear that, things that you deal with, it helps when people come together. It helps when people come to aid each other. Um, I guess, how do you feel about the need for that and what happens when that's not there?
Well, I think it's exactly right. I think it's one of the things that we encourage our firefighters to do almost immediately, and that is start talking about it. Not to make people uncomfortable, but just start talking about what you went through. And for us in the fire service, we start doing that as soon as the event is done. As soon
Mm.
as the fire is out, our firefighters are encouraged to talk about it. They're trained to have those types of conversations, and we do that in a more formal sense as time passes. So, I think we talked about mental health for firefighters already and how important it is, but I encourage any firefighters who are out there struggling. The BC First Responder Mental Health Coalition has a website, bcfirstresponder.mentalhealth.com. There are resources if you're looking for help. There are resources if you're looking to provide help, and there are resources for your family there as well. So, such an important thing to seek that out, talk about it with your peers, but also for the public to talk about it. Talk about what you went through. Talk about it with your neighbors. That's encouraging to me when neighborhoods come together and talk about what they went through, because the outcome from that is generally a question is asked, and that question is, how can we be better prepared for next time? And I think that is another important thing through all of this is finding a way to direct that energy, that anxious energy that people are no doubt still feeling,
Mm.
towards being better prepared for next time. And that is the Fire Smart principles. Once again, Fire Smart BC has great things that people can put energy into now, that we're hopefully soon turning the corner towards spring and getting prepared for the next wildfire season. So I think talking about it, and I think taking some action so that people feel better prepared
Mm.
can be a great can be a great calming factor.
Being proactive, finding a sense of purpose. I know you're talking about being prepared for the wildfire season. I know there are concerns with the level of snowpack that we have right now, despite snow coming. It's the reservoirs have still been quite low. Um, I'm interested in what it meant to you to go to New York to speak about climate change and the fact that this is a concern. Did that give you that sense of being proactive?
Absolutely. I think any opportunity I have to share what our community went through and how it came through it, but also to challenge leaders who can change things on a much larger scale than I can,
Hmm.
is a very good thing, and that's what my trip to New York was all about. But you know, I'm not a climate scientist. I just
Sure.
see the results of things on the ground, and that
Hmm.
is that yes, we do face more extreme weather, or so it seems, than we have in the past. But I can't change the weather. I certainly watch it closely. Uh, we have some ground to cover before we get to next fire season in terms of where our snowpack is and where it could be. We always look out for those rains in June, the June monsoons, and that can really influence what our fire season looks like. But all of that said, we can't change the weather, but we can become more prepared through things like Fire Smart and ensuring that our home is more resilient against wildfire.
Preparation and being proactive. That's gonna stay with me from our conversation with you, Jason. Let's take another call. Kynan is at Salt Spring Island. Hi, Kynan.
Hi there.
Hi, and what are your thoughts about staying informed, but also keeping your mental well-being in mind?
Well, I think it's so important to treat news sources almost the same way you treat food, and to have a really balanced and spread out diet of news sources. I really like to look at both international headliners as well as the local news sources close to the event. It's really important, I find, to get the emotionality behind the people that are speaking or the people that are writing as well, because that can really affect the wording and the phrasing you see in the document, and even change what it means between different people repeating on the same thing, reporting on the same thing.
Oh, you've given us a lot of thought, Kynan.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah. And is that, I guess, is there anything changing this year for you at all, or you'll continue to see things that way, that balance?
Well, this year I really actually value Canadian news sources not that I didn't before, but Canada has a really good location in the world between a lot of different great powers of the current age. And we have a very nuanced position on a lot of different events in the world today, with a lot of different opinions and voices on that. And so I see Canadian news sources actually being one of the best. So in combination with that, and then regional news sources like Al Jazeera in the Middle East, for example, or something similar, you get a really good overall picture without too much of a single point being made.
Point of view. Kynan, thank you very much for the call. Really appreciate it. I'm going to end with Dr. Jillian Roberts. I have about a minute left, but just some words of advice to close with from you.
I love the idea of talking with each other. I want to make sure that we consider something, and that is not passing the trauma baton. So when we talk with each other, I think it's completely fine to talk about how you're feeling or what you're doing, or, you know, how you're creating that sense of agency, or connecting socially with others, and your emotions, talk about them deeply. I think all of that is okay. The one thing that we need to be careful about is not putting a mental image that's in our mind into somebody else's mind. You know, so when I'm teaching psychology and I'm trying to give case examples, I try to be very careful not to paint a picture of the trauma for the other person in their mind. So it was interesting. First responders do this carefully.
Being mindful of others still. Thank you so much to both of you for this very thoughtful conversation. I'm going to take it with me into 2024. My great thanks to West Kelowna Fire Rescue Chief Jason Brolund and registered psychologist Dr. Jillian Roberts. All the best to you, and thanks so much for those thoughts. Again, the tips that she gave were validate the feelings, come together, and share a sense of agency. And her website is mindkeyhealth.com. We'll post this full discussion as a standalone video on the CBC Vancouver YouTube page. You can watch it anytime. I'm Michelle Eliot. Great to be with you. Have a good afternoon.